So my name is Kitty Anderson. I'm the secretary of the executive board of organization Intersex International Europe and the chairperson of Intersex Iceland. I was thinking maybe first if everybody could just introduce themselves, name, pronoun, and where they're from, just very briefly.
Okay, my name is Eva. I use the pronoun she, and I'm here employed at Ljubljana.
Hi, I'm Matea. My pronoun is she, and currently I'm doing EBS in Ljubljana Pride Association.
I'm Heidi. I use she. I'm affiliated with Transakcja Institute.
I'm Kaya. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm not affiliated with any institution.
I'm Naya. I use they pronouns, and I'm with the here.
I'm Jessica. I use she, and I'm from Pride.
I'm Simona. I use she, and I'm also from Pride.
My name is Jasna. I use she, and I'm a photographer.
My name is Tina. I use she from Association for Quality Life for Young People.
I'm Tadea. I use she, and I'm from Culture Center.
I'm Matea. I use the pronoun she, and I come from Ljubljana.
I'm Evan. I use pronoun they, them, and I work for Transakcja and Ljubljana.
Hi, I'm Ada. I use she or they pronouns, and I come from Kvartier.
Kitty, she or they, and Kvartier.
Sure. My name is Nina. I go by she. I'm with Pride volunteer.
I'm Isaac. I go by he, him, and I'm with Ljubljana Pride.
Hi, I'm Hana. I use she, and I'm from Parada Ljubljana Pride.
So the setup today is going to be first an hour or so of presentation, and then we'll get into more practical things. So the presentation will be split into three parts. The first part is just a very basic 101. Then we're going to look at a bit of history, and then we're going to history and then terminology, and then aspects that relate more to making NGOs more intersex inclusive. So the first question is, who does the term intersex encompass? So with OIA Europe, we use this definition, which is very long. I'm not going to read it out to you, but it will be explained. However, as a working definition, we tend to use this one. Intersex people are born with physical sex characteristics that don't fit medical norms for male or female bodies. So what are sex characteristics? So sex characteristics are divided into two subcategories. Primary sex characteristics, that is your outer or inner genitalia, or reproductive system. Gonads, that's usually ovaries or testes. Chromosomes, so XX are more often women, XY are more often men. And hormones. This is both what hormones the body produces, but also what hormones the body responds to. Secondary sex characteristics are the sex characteristics that appear at puberty. So this is breast growth, hair growth, muscle mass, stature, fat distribution. So biological aspects that relate to sex are complicated. In schools we learn that XX equals women, XY equals men, and that there are certain biological aspects that go with those chromosomes. That's bullshit. Sex characteristics are more a complex relationship between your chromosomes, genes that activate how you respond to hormones, and how your body responds to hormones, or what hormones your body produces, or is exposed to in utero. So, for example, a fetus that has XY chromosomes will most often develop along a masculine path in types of outer phenotype, so basically what the doctor sees when you're born. But for this to happen, the body of that child needs to be able to absorb testosterone or be exposed to testosterone in utero. For example, when there is a gene that is named the SRY gene, this activates the body's ability to respond to testosterone. So if the SRY gene isn't kicking off, then that body will not respond to testosterone, period. So basically what this means is that every single person on this earth started out with a vagina. It's that simple. A penis and a vagina are not two separate sex organs, it's the same thing. Everybody has a genital. It just depends on the level of testosterone absorption either in utero or later on in life, whether that genital is a penis or a vagina. I was hoping to see more cis men here today because it's really fun to tell them that they started out with a vagina. But oh well, can't have all the fun. In the same line, a fetus that has XX chromosomes but is either very sensitive to testosterone or is exposed to more testosterone than average in utero will develop a penis. In some cases, the exposure or absorption is not full, so it's not full virilization. And then the genital will be somewhere between what is considered a vagina and what is considered a penis. So in some cases, this child would be deemed to have a too large clitoris. There is nothing bad about having a big clit. Just telling you. It's not like that sex organ, that organ is designed for one thing, which is pleasure, so it so often you'll hear like people who are born with both genitals. No, it's the same genital. It just depends on the level of testosterone that that genital has received and reacted to. So how many people are intersex? We very often hear a figure of 1 in 1,500 to 1 in 2,000. So these are children who are believed to warrant a medical or social emergency when they're born. That is, their genital, outer genital, isn't clearly a vagina or clearly a penis. The numbers that are used to measure this are basically millimeters, a ruler. If it's under 0.9, it's deemed a clitoris. If it's over 2.5, it's deemed a penis. However, recent research in the Netherlands points to the number of intersex people to be at least 1 in 200. So that's 0.5%. The research I'm mentioning is called Living with Intersex DSD and was contracted by the Dutch government. But that's not a complete figure either, because in that figure they only count specific medical diagnostic terms that are deemed to be intersex. And a lot of intersex people have never been diagnosed with anything. This might be that during puberty their testosterone levels are higher than most people's. So it's this figure is very lacking in inclusivity. The UN Free and Equal campaign uses figure 1.7%. A lot of those people will never hear the word intersex anywhere within their life in a way that they think it could apply to them. But then again, in the 1 in 200 figure, a lot of people never hear the word intersex. My doctor never told me I was intersex. I learned that word for the first time when I was 22. So when we think of, when we talk about sex, we talk about sex as existing on a continuum. And when we hear the word continuum, we very often think of nice little neat lines, because we like things to be neat and easily explained and orderly. And this nice little neat line could be used to say gender is on a continuum from A to B. And we'll put little lines and say, oh, these are women, these are men, these are people who identify as genderqueer, non-binary, whatever. We can use the same sort of concept with sex on a continuum. But the thing is, none of this is divided neatly into little neat packages that can be put forward. When we say think of sex as a continuum, I'd like you to imagine this more as a galaxy. A continuum in 3D, where every single star here is a human person. So if we start thinking of sex as a continuum in 3D, then somebody at one point said that anybody who is here counts as male. Anybody who is here, I'm not good at drawing, counts as female. So these are just lines that we made up. It's not real. The thing is, you can have a person here who is deemed as male, and then the person here will be deemed as intersex. These people are super close together. Here we're just talking about their biological aspects. These people are very, very close in biology. Much closer than this person and this person. They're both deemed male. This one's not. So how does, we often use LGBTI, so how do intersex people connect to the LGBT? Not really, at all. So when we're talking about LGBT, we're using lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans. But then we often also use grounds, so SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. When it comes to gender identity, intersex people can have any gender identity because there is not a correlation between your biology and your gender identity. Otherwise, all intersex people would identify as non-binary, which they don't. Many intersex people are men and women, period. Just because their biology is a bit different doesn't make them less of a woman or less of a man. And then some intersex people identify outside the binary. Just because their biology isn't quite typically male or female doesn't automatically make them non-binary, that's their gender identity. So these are two separate things that we're talking about. We're talking about gender identity and sex characteristics. So sex characteristics are the grounds that apply to intersex people. Assuming anything else would be a form of biological biological determinism saying that your biology determines your gender in some way. It doesn't. Sexual orientation, the same. Intersex people can have any sexual orientation. A lot of intersex people are straight. Some are lesbian, gay, bi, pan, asexual. Two completely different things. So, some of the key issues that the intersex community faces are a breach of bodily autonomy and physical integrity. So these are very often medical treatments that are enforced on intersex infants to normalize their bodies. So in the case of a clitoris being larger than 0.9 millimeters, 0.9 centimeters, 9 millimeters, then clitoral reductions are performed. It used to be, and still happens in some places, that clitoral amputations were performed. That is, the entire clitoris was removed. Today, most doctors who perform surgeries, clitoral surgeries on intersex children, will perform clitoral reductions, which is basically where you cut the tip of the clitoris, lift it up, remove all the middle part, and then sew the clitoris back on, the tip of it. Intersex people will often also face vaginoplasties. So these are surgical procedures meant to create a vagina in a small child. For anyone who is knowledgeable about trans healthcare, they will know that after a vaginoplasty, then you need to use a dilator to maintain the surgery. And of course, when you perform a vaginoplasty on a small child, there are two choices. You either maintain that vaginal opening through dilation, or you do nothing and the vagina, what they call is atrophies, that is, it closes up again. So young intersex children will have been subjected to vaginoplasties facilitating need for dilation, which means that either their doctor or a nurse or a healthcare provider inserts a plastic rod into the vagina to maintain the opening, or parents have to do this to their children. Many parents who have been forced to do this to their children later explain feelings that they basically sexually abuse their children. Many children who were subjected to this describe feelings that are very comparable to victims of childhood sexual abuse. Gonadectomies are also performed, so this is when either the ovaries or the testes, or in some cases ovotestes, are removed. These are the parts of your body that produce hormones, and we all need hormones. Without hormones, our bones cannot develop correctly. And this leads to high risks of osteopenia or osteoporosis, that is, brittle bones, at young ages. We have a lot of cases of 30-year-olds with full-blown osteoporosis and 18, 19-year-olds with osteopenia, meaning that their bones are starting to become brittle. There are also hormonal treatments. So in some cases, children under the age of 6 months old will be injected with testosterone to make their penis bigger, because apparently it's a bad thing to have a small penis in our society. And it's bad enough that they will subject children to hormonal injections of testosterone at a very young age. In other cases, they will, when the clitoris is deemed too big, they will bombard that child with estrogens in childhood and steroid treatments to reduce the size of the clitoris. There are also drugs that are administered prenatally and off-label, so that means they're given to the mother when she is pregnant, and the mother is given a drug that's used for something completely different. This drug is called prenatal dexamethasone, and it's a very good drug. It's used during surgery to help with dealing with the effects of anesthesia. So when the person is waking up, they will receive this drug to make the wake-up process easier. It wasn't intended to be used on small fetuses to make their clitoris shrink. And a lot of countries are still using this despite research pointing to very negative long-term effects on cognition, mental health, and more. Sweden is currently the only country in the world that has banned the use of this drug. But the other issue is secrecy and stigma. So there is a huge lack of visible role models. When did she come out? So you might have heard of the model Hana Kotti, who came out, I think, very late last year, rather than early this year. She is the first sort of person to publicly, sort of famous person, to publicly step out and say, I am intersex and it's okay. Before that, people who were out had been outed. So in the case of, for example, Caster Semenya, South African runner, she was basically dragged through the media. Very negative coverage. There's also the case of Duty Chand, another runner. There are some gymnasts who were sort of less publicly outed late last century. So before an intersex person who had actually attained fame made the decision to come out publicly, it was people being outed and basically dragged through a shitstorm of sensationalist media. Hana coming out is great for young kids. Like, it doesn't matter what her profession is. It's just somebody who has attained success in her field is saying, I'm intersex, I'm okay, I'm proud of who I am. That's quite important. Most people have somebody famous they can sort of relate to, whether that is a singer or an actor or whatever. Intersex people are routinely advised not to discuss the realities outside of closed circles. So that means not talking about this with anyone else other than their family. Often they're told not to tell their siblings, told to not tell their partners, or tell their partners lies. So, for example, it was quite common at one point for women who were born with XY chromosomes and internal testes to tell their partners that they had cancer as a child and had to have a full hysterectomy, and that's why they couldn't have kids. But the thing is, that's what intersex people themselves also used to be often told, because it was quite common for doctors to say, don't tell your kid. Your kid will not be able to understand. And we know that that still happens. It's becoming less, but we still have cases where intersex people are not even told. But even if they are told, they are then told not to tell anyone else. This emphasis on secrecy and stigma has led to a difficulty in forming communities, because if you can't tell anyone, how are you going to find someone? And of course this emphasis on secrecy leads to shame. If there's something so wrong with you, you can't tell anyone about it, then that automatically becomes something that you're supposed to be ashamed of. So now we're going to go very briefly over some history. History is fun. So 16th to 18th century, then sex or gender was usually assigned at birth by midwives or parents. But we do have cases where the adult wanted this assignment rectified. So this could be a case where a child was born looking like a girl, but then went through more male puberty and therefore virilized. And there are cases in, for example, church records where religious leaders rectified this assignment. Not for all intersex people who wanted it, of course, but in some cases it did happen. And if you look through sort of texts from these times, then there are various viewpoints. In some cases, the viewpoint was, oh, this is just something that occurs in nature, who cares? In other cases, there were sort of indications that these people were somehow touched by God, angels sent to earth. In other cases, it was due to satanic influence, that the parents had done something bad while the mother was pregnant, that this was maybe the devil enticing the mother, and therefore this devil was the parent's child. All kinds of viewpoints like that. So there wasn't any sort of one way of thinking of this. Within Judaism, there are several distinct sexes named: male, female, Ailonit, Saris Hama, androgynous, and Tumtum. According to Judaism, I'm Tumtum. These sexes actually line up with intersex biology. So Tumtum would be one, Saris Hama would be the case where a child is born looking like a girl but goes through male puberty. They sort of connect to different intersex biologies. In the 19th and 20th century, then in 1849, we have the first recorded surgical procedure to change a child's sex characteristics. In this case, a clitoral amputation. But there are very few records of this happening during this time. And at this time, there is very little knowledge within the medical community that intersex people exist. But during wartime, sort of wars, especially in the US during the late 19th century, doctors who are serving as field medics and therefore dealing with injured soldiers or performing autopsies on deceased soldiers start realizing that their biology isn't quite as clear-cut as they had previously assumed. So there we start to see sort of more writing about these intersex people. But it's still limited in scope. However, during the industrial era, when, especially for example in the US, towns and cities start forming, then we see a change in medical practice. Instead of most births taking place in the home, then when people lived in cities, then very often they would go to a hospital to give birth. And it's during this time that doctors become increasingly aware that there are more children than they had ever expected being born looking a bit different than the other kids. This leads to a flurry of sort of research and sort of looking at these issues. And that brings us to what is called the age of gonads. During this time, doctors were realizing that there were these parts of your body called gonads, and that they produced a powerful substance called hormones. So this is when they learned about gonads and hormones, not that long ago. And they became convinced that you could determine anyone's true sex by looking at their gonads. This, of course, is complete bullshit. However, surgeries were very rare until the mid-20th century. In the early 20th century, hospitals were often known as sort of death houses. People would go in for surgery and they wouldn't survive because things like proper sterilization just didn't really exist. So very often infections and things like that would occur and lead to sepsis and death. So surgery sort of become an increasingly used option as the 20th century progresses, along with advancements that meant they could perform surgeries and keep people alive. Whoops, I think I went. Yeah. So, there are links between the LGBT human rights violations in the 20th century and the ongoing intersex human rights violations. Notice that there is no T there. This is because during this time then trans issues just were very unknown, and the very few trans people who came to doctors' notice were very often deemed as being intersex in some way of the brain, or in this time they weren't really using the word intersex, they were using hermaphrodites. So brain hermaphrodites. But there was sort of less discussion on this issue because it just wasn't known as much. But at this time, the medical community's interest in homosexuality is rapidly increasing. And there are theories that intersex people were always, that they were inherently homosexual. There were also theories that intersex people were always bisexual, and this was considered even worse. It was called fickle sexuality. They couldn't make up their mind. That's who you have to thank for that societal viewpoint. And at this time, doctors were generally in agreement that the most humane solution for intersex people was castration. In some cases, they were of the opinion that the most humane solution for gay men was castration. However, individuals rarely accepted this because they were adults. They could just stand up and walk out of the doctor's office and say, "No, I don't want you to do that to me." But there are records of consensual surgeries. They're very few, but we do have records of a woman coming in with a very large clitoris who said, "I think this might hurt my marriage prospects. Could you please remove it?" Because, of course, during this time, being married was what it was all about. So, during this time, this is sort of the mid-20th century, this is when the current intersex treatment paradigms comes into effect. And it is highly colored by societal attitudes of the time. So if we look at what the LGBT community is facing during this era, lobotomies, electroshock therapy, institutionalization, conversion therapy, some of this is still going on. Especially, I think lobotomies have become very rare in the cases of lesbian, gay, bisexual mistreatment. But conversion therapy is definitely still taking place. Institutionalization still happens. Electroshock therapy is still in some places being used. But why did this treatment paradigm of just performing operations on these children start? That was because of a psychologist called John Money. And among feminists of the time, John Money was hailed as something of a hero because he came with the theory of optimal gender rearing. So this theory is based on the premise that gender identity is fully malleable. It's plastic. You can take any child, and so long as they look like one of the sexes and are raised as one of the sexes, they will identify as the gender that is usually attributed to that sex. So of course it's bullshit. If this were the case, there would be no trans people, because they would all agree with the assignment they received at birth. So, yeah, no. He tested this theory out, and the most famous case is David Reimer's. David Reimer was a twin, born in the US, and in the US, circumcision of young boys is fairly routine. At this point in time, it was just standard. David Reimer's twin brother was circumcised first, and then David Reimer was circumcised, but they were using an experimental procedure which involved using electricity to burn the foreskin off. And, well, it's the mid-1950s, electrics weren't that good, there was a power surge, and the entire penis was burnt off. David Reimer's parents are understandably very upset, but they're brought to John Money saying, this psychologist can help you and tell you what to do. And John Money said, we will create a vagina on this child, you will raise this child as a girl, and this kid will be a girl. Because David Reimer wore dresses without kicking, screaming, and like ripping them off, and he'd go and sit with the girls and move dolls around, this was considered a success. But David Reimer was not the only one. This was something that happened to quite a few children during this time, and usually in the cases of botched circumcisions, then this was the solution offered. But Money's theories were proven to be false, because when David Reimer became a teenager and was supposed to start estrogen, he of course had to be told what had happened to him. And he then started speaking out, saying that he had grown up his entire life being envious of his brother and wanting to be just like him, because David Reimer was a girl. Doing an operation to create a vagina doesn't change someone's gender identity. However, John Money's theory continued in medical practice to be used in the cases of intersex children. And this is because of Money's cooperation with Lawson Wilkins. So in the 1930s, 1940s, Lawson Wilkins was treating quite a lot of intersex children. And at this time he seems to have a sort of very case-by-case viewpoint, that there is an understanding that these children are all different, they're individuals, and more of a sort of tendency to listen to what the kids were saying as they were growing up. Wilkins is important because he is the father of pediatric endocrinology. Before Wilkins, there were only adult endocrinologists. Wilkins, as a father of an entire new branch of medicine, was of course basically revered as God. He trained the entire first generation of pediatric endocrinologists and a large portion of the second generation, who then went on to train the subsequent third, fourth, fifth generations. And the closer you are to the father of your entire profession, then of course you will look at what he said as gospel, truth, Bible. But we are noticing that as time goes on, then more and more pediatric endocrinologists are sort of going, yes, this is old news, we should be advancing. So an unlikely alliance occurred of John Money and Lawson Wilkins, who were both working at the same hospital, Johns Hopkins University Hospital in the US. And when they got together, at this time psychologists weren't that highly respected within the medical community. So when he got together, John Money got together with Wilkins, John Money's theory became Wilkins' theory and therefore became much more respected and was very quickly became widespread. And as Wilkins trained the entire first generation of pediatric endocrinologists, they all went out into the world to spread the gospel of the father of their profession. So, I'm exactly on time. So now we're going to look at various terms and phrases. Just to let you know, some of these are bad, some of these are kind of neutral, and some of these are preferred terminology. So, let's start with hermaphrodite or pseudo-hermaphrodite. What do you think? Good, bad, neutral?
Bad.
Why?
First of all, it's not even accurate. It comes from Greek mythology and implies you have characteristics of two different sexes, and that's not possible. Second of all, it has a very negative connotation nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And then when you had pseudo before, pseudo just means fake. So you're a fake person? What about DSD, disorder of sex development?
Too medicalized.
Too medicalized, right. So DSD is fairly new terminology from 2006. It was brought to light by a consensus statement by a bunch of doctors who went, intersex is too confusing, it might have make people worry that their child will be lesbian or gay or bi. Like, this was used as rationale. And therefore we will use disorders of sex development because that's easier to explain.
Yeah, disorder sounds much better.
Then we have these medical terms such as CIAS, CAH, Klinefelter, Turner syndrome, things like that. Good, bad.
It's diagnosing people again.
Yeah.
Apologization of.
Very good. Intersex people will sometimes use these as a shortcut to having to explain. So especially when we're talking to each other, we'll go like, CIS. Because it's quicker than saying, I was born with XY chromosomes and internal testes but an inactive SRYG. So, like, yeah, we will sometimes use them because it's quicker. But then some of us, for example with CIAS, which stands for Complete Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome, a bunch of us will say, oh, I'm completely androgen insensitive. So what about ambiguous genitalia? No reactions? There's nothing ambiguous about genitalia. A person's genitalia is their genitalia. Period. It's very often used to sort of describe intersex children who are born with genitalia that isn't clearly male, clearly vagina, or clearly penis, but it sort of implies that there's something a bit off with it. There's nothing off about anybody's genitalia unless they can't, like, pee. That's a problem. But no. And then we have dyadic. Does anybody know what that actually means?
Not intersex.
A pair, like two. But I don't know how it relates to
It means non-intersex.
Yeah, it's sometimes used to talk about, it's especially common to use it then when we're talking about infants, where you don't even know a person's gender identity when they're an infant. So it basically means a person who is close enough to that female part or that male part that when they're born the doctor sort of doesn't go, oh, there's something wrong. Sometimes some intersex people will use endosex, so at the ends. I'm actually becoming increasingly, I'm liking that more and more. Then we have intersex condition.
It's not a condition. It sounds like something you can put it away. We'll just repair it and put it away.
Exactly. Then we have intersexuality, intersexual, intersexed. So this is linguistically just a bit off. Intersex doesn't have to do with your sexuality. And intersexed is kind of like transgendered, which is really weird. Then we have intersex status. This actually exists in legislation in Australia. The legislation of intersex status was not pushed through by intersex people. It was pushed through by a non-binary trans activist who wanted X markers and thought this was the easiest way to be allowed an X marker. It's problematic because status is something you are awarded in some way. So it's sort of, the problem with it is that somebody has to actually agree that you are intersex for you to be protected by legislation that is based on status. So we have refugee status. You are awarded refugee status, for example, by the UN, stuff like that. Then we have the most appropriate terminologies. When we're talking on the basis of intersex language, especially, it's intersex people, or intersex variation, or intersex traits. So what sort of covers all intersex people is that they have variations in their sex characteristics. It's just a variation. Okay, so now we're going to go to the... So now we're going to move more towards sort of NGOs, activists, what can be done. So tips for making organizations intersex inclusive. So this, the number one thing is visibility. Offer intersex resources along with other resources. So for example, if you have a library, we have issue papers, we have focus papers, there are toolkits out there. All good to include alongside with other comparable sources. Or this can be on your website, having a resource, a part of your website that links to resources. So this could be linking directly to, for example, OIA Europe's website. We have a website called intervisibility.eu where we're translating information about intersex issues into multiple European languages. There is a Slovenian part of this website which will soon be updated with further translations. Right now we have a very basic 101, who are intersex people and what is OIA Europe. Soon the Council of Europe recommendations for intersex people will be included there as well. It's a work in progress. And we do hope to be able to include all kinds of resources. We're starting doing that. So videos, audio testimonials, writing, things like that by intersex people in different languages. Be mindful of the language you use, so strive towards using inclusive language most of the time. It can be virtually impossible to use inclusive language 100% of the time in anything. It's a fact. Sometimes when we're talking just about intersex issues, then our language isn't very LGBT inclusive because we're talking about one thing. But when you're talking more broader, then aim to use inclusive language. Creating a safe space for intersex people, this basically just means educating yourself a bit. If an intersex people comes to your organization and is subjected to being called a hermaphrodite or a freak, they won't want to come back. I once called my national, then it was LGB organization, not to join them, but looking for support. This is back in 2005, I think. I called them and said, hey, can I please use your space, your community center, maybe once a month for 2 hours and advertise a meeting there. And maybe some people will show up and we can start community building. And the person on the phone said, no, there is no space for freaks here. I did not look at anything that organization put out for almost a decade. I didn't attend Pride because, no, this was the community that said there was no space for freaks here. I didn't go to anything connected with LGBT because that was well, in this case actually just LGB because they had not included T yet. That didn't happen until 2009. Yeah, Iceland isn't advanced as most people like to think. So I just had like this automatic barrier. Just, oh, that's something to do with LGBT. No, that's not me, I'm not going there. Today, that organization is intersex inclusive. They're the LGBTQIAP organization of Iceland, usually just termed the National Queer Organization. And I have now been on the board since 2015 and serve as their international secretariat. They turned around and they did good. So, also respect the fact that intersex people who come to LGBT organizations might not be LGBT. They might identify within the binary, be in a straight relationship, they're still intersex. You don't have to be LGBT to be part of the LGBTI community, just as you don't have to be trans and LGBT to be part of the LGBT community, and you don't have to be trans or intersex to be part of the LGBT community. Make sure you ask for input from intersex organizations and activists. So this is what was done this year. And if the NGO gets the opportunity to influence policy, then try to obtain feedback from intersex people on what is being proposed. So this can be legislation, this can be like municipality policies. You might not have an intersex organization. You can still reach out to, for example, us at OIA Europe. Greece does not have an intersex organization. Very recently there were legislation proposals put forward, and an organization there called Color Youth contacted us to feedback on it. They don't have an intersex organization, but we at OIA Europe are in contact with both individual intersex people not activists, just intersex people who live in Greece, as well as a large group of parents of intersex kids. So these are people who don't feel safe enough to be out in Greek community. They are out to us. So instead of an organization trying to find someone to input on this, they handed it over to us, and we worked on it with our contacts on the ground. Then we were the middleman who handed it back to that organization for translation without having to out the people who we are in contact with. So, reaching out. It's important that resources are visible. That there is an easy way, like if somebody is looking at, for example, your website, that it's not hidden somewhere in a back corner where you can't have to click through everything else on the website to actually find it. We have that problem with Samtökin 78 with our website and a couple of resources. Very impossible to find. We're realizing how problematic that is in the last year and just going, okay, we need somebody to fix our website. Bring the topic of intersex rights into public awareness. So discuss intersex issues. Talk about it, like, oh, I did a training. You never know when there's an intersex person somewhere around you who sort of hears this being said and goes, oh, maybe I can find something here, like, and goes looking. Share intersex-related content, like intersex social media. Between the days of October 26th and November 9th, intersex awareness. Check our social media, we'll be sharing a bunch of stuff then. Making sure that your NGO is welcoming to intersex people, so that basically just means that people are aware enough not to say stupid shit. That people are aware enough to say, no, you can't be a woman. If an intersex woman says she's a woman, she's a woman. Period. Organizing a big event for public outreaching is often not the best idea. Now, organizing a big event, like, for example, the public event tonight, that's not solely for the purpose of outreaching, that's awareness raising. I've also been at an event where I was there on a panel, and at the very end, one of the local activists said, oh, and if any person here is intersex, please come and put your name and email on this sheet, and we'll try to connect you. Doesn't work like that. A better idea then would have been, okay, we have created this email address, only this person has access to it, send an email and we'll try to connect you somehow. Because then people don't have to stand up, walk through a room and go. Don't expect intersex people you meet to immediately become activists. A lot of people just don't want to become activists, don't feel they have the skills, they need capacity building. There are so many reasons for why a person becomes an activist, and not everybody becomes an activist the moment they meet other community members. And please don't expect intersex people to be experts on intersex issues from the start if you start meeting them. Some might know a lot. Others might know a lot about their particular biology and nothing else. Some might actually be coming to you because they don't have information, so they're looking for information. And in the same vein, not all intersex people are going to be fully aware of all issues that the LGBT community faces. Not all LGBT people are aware of all issues that other LGBT people face. I mean, It's fact. So give them some time to just study up a bit and learn and become exposed to the issues faced. So what services can NGOs provide? So firstly, psychological counseling, psychotherapy, social counseling. So it's really good when counselors, organizations that have counselors, that counselors read up, that they become aware and don't get an intersex people in for a counseling session and say, okay, so you're like a he-she. Kind of extreme examples, I know, but you get where I'm going.
I think that even if you are a counselor in LGBT NGO, how can you ask something like that? It's
it has happened.
It's just hard for me to hear things like this. So,
like, people are of all sorts, and like some counselors aren't great counselors. We have a psychiatrist back home who is just an evil example of a human being. He thinks that trauma support is the most bullshit concept in the world. Like, he also always asks because he's head of the trans team of Iceland, he asks trans women, so what kind of underwear are you wearing? How do you have sex? And then when trans men come in, he sits there and strokes his thigh the entire time. It's creepy as fuck. Just because people are trained in issues to deal with psychology, like a good psychologist is probably a decent person. And kind of shitty people can also become psychologists. So they might come for legal counseling. So just knowing their rights. For anybody who's involved in the legal side, things that are good to know are like statutes of limitation for reporting medical mistreatment. In Iceland, it's 10 years. After that, you can't do anything. So they might be coming to ask just legal questions like, do I have any rights? With Intersex Iceland, what we do a lot is help people obtaining their medical records. So knowing how to obtain someone's complete set of medical records, that's a really cool thing for they might be coming because they want to start a support group. So giving space for that, providing a counselor and a meeting room once a month for them to sort of meet up and just talk about their issues. They might want to meet up solo without a counselor, providing a meeting room. Library and information sources, and hopefully meeting spaces. So not support groups, like activists coming together and working on their shit. And last slide is about how to be a good ally to intersex persons. So respect the language the intersex person used to describe themselves. So what is preferred for another might be offensive to another. When you're not sure, try to avoid condition, syndrome, disorder, talk about variations, traits. But if a person comes in and uses, I have complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, that might be because that's all they've ever heard. And for some, it takes them a while to sort of start switching away from the thought process of it being a syndrome. No, it's not. It's complete androgen sensitivity. That was, for me, the only term I had heard until I was 22. So we're trained into that thought line. Be willing to learn from the experience of intersex people. So if there are intersex people, make sure that when it relates to intersex issues, that their voice is heard and that people aren't speaking over them. They might not be in a position to sort of stand up for themselves and like go, no, 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 I want to talk now. They might just sit there and go, okay, these are the experts, I guess. So, even if an intersex person doesn't know as much as you about intersex issues, don't patronize them, please. They know they're experts on themselves, because we're all experts on ourselves. I don't think I really need to go over this, really. Just be careful not to ask questions that are too personal or uncomfortable. Try not to support pathologization and medicalization of intersex bodies. When discussing intersex issues, make sure not to conflate being intersex with sexual orientation or gender identity. Do not use the variation of sex characteristics to deconstruct gender. Non-binary people do not magically exist because intersex people exist. It's not the same thing. Non-binary people exist because non-binary people exist. That is in and itself valid and strong enough. Intersex people exist because intersex people exist. Gay people exist because gay people exist. Lesbians exist because lesbians exist. Bisexuals exist because bisexuals exist. And when publicly discussing intersex issues, always assume that there are intersex people in the audience. They may or may not even know they are intersex. They may be hearing that word for the first time there and only have a diagnostic term that they've heard. Or they might be coming there to see how you handle discussing the issues. And may or may not disclose that they are intersex. I've done that several times, gone to listen to some university lecturer babble on about intersex issues, and then either stood up, if I thought they were worth working on, stood up and said, no, what you're saying isn't right. And in some cases just gone, yeah, no, I'm not having an argument with this person, I'm not dealing with that, and just left. So, now we are, hands up who is not participating in the exercise.
We can if we didn't apply.
No, like, people who are here for different roles than actually participating in the workshop. So, camera, I'm guessing no? No. Okay, okay, so 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15. So please split up into groups of 5. And you probably know each other better than I do, so like if there are people who are sort of more geared towards counseling, things like that, maybe get together more. If there are people who are more towards legal, get together more, sort of if you know that people work in something similar to yourselves, try to team up a bit. So 3 groups of 5.
Maybe we can be together and really play a role.
Yeah, I think I will try there.
Considering what we do, I should meet here. You'll just need a chair.
Okay, so please grab, everybody gets a stack of Post-its.
Thank you.
And please have pens or grab pens. So who has heard of SWOT?
Yes. Yes.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So for the next 15 minutes you are going to work solo. You may not ask me anything. I'm actually going to leave the room. I want you to, on like multiple Post-its, so don't write it all tiny letters on one. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. From everything you've sort of picked up, where do you think you're strong?
We also have nothing about intersex without intersex people, but we
We talked about Legibitra. We already have established the counseling program and legal advisory program, so maybe we can open up more programs to intersex themes. It exists, it's funded, so
you just need the knowledge to...
Yeah. And also the community space. And we have the desire to learn more, so and know more.
No more, like
yeah.
Yeah.
To know. To learn and know more. So weaknesses.
Right. So we haven't got any organized groups or organizations to cover this topic. We also have lack of interest from cis male people. And we haven't got any intersex role models that are out in Slovenia.
Or we had similar things, I think. Does anyone want to add something?
Knowledge. And we have lack of knowledge still, knowledge and lack of terminology in Slovene. Because we constantly debate that. Here, but like, lack of resources.
Lack of resources in Slovenia.
Yeah, lack of resources. In Slovenia, yeah. Resources in Slovenia.
Is this resources in terms of like library informational resources or time and money resources?
Actually both. Actually both. Yeah. And this would be more like library.
Yes.
Okay, so opportunities. Can you identify any current opportunities?
We have, first of all the pre-existing resources that could be adapted to be more intersex inclusive. So we have like, spaces, websites, groups that could include intersex people. We also feel like there's an opportunity for a lot of potential alliances. We think there's a lot of parallels between different LGBT groups. And you also mentioned like how historically intersex and gay and bi people were conflated. I think that would be an alliance. We see that education or like self-education is a big opportunity, and we also thought about how there might not be any local intersex activists, but we do have a lot of international connections and could leverage that.
Okay.
So we were talking that one opportunity might be that as Slovenia is so small, and actually the medical professionals who are actually in charge of the areas that cover right now intersex health, especially for the infants, young children, it's actually very often the same people that also come up as being, let's say, the experts in the country also for transgender people. And as there is some, let's say, vigilance from civil society on the topics of transgender towards this medical sphere, this might be an opportunity, you know, because it might also be that we could build pressure from this perspective and just kind of monitor better what's happening also in this area. And the other opportunity is actually the international framework, normative, and just having also examples from other countries how legally, for example, like to prohibit unnecessary operations and things like this. You know, if you have examples from abroad that you can